everyone. It's Lorie Brown, nurse attorney with empowerednurses.org and yournurseattorney.com. Back with you on the Hey Nurses, What's Next? How 21 nurses became business owners and successful entrepreneurs. And today I'm really, really excited because we have Heather Manus, who also goes by Sobel, right?
And I go by Nurse Heather.
Nurse Heather. Okay, awesome. So what is so interesting about Nurse Heather is she's a cannabis nurse. So Heather Manus, RN, is a native New Mexican and registered nurse specializing in medical cannabis care. And Nurse Heather began her career as a registered nurse, providing psychiatric home health care to patients in New Mexico. And Nurse Heather has an extensive background and experience in natural healing modalities and herbal remedies, some of which she obtained from her close association with Hispanic and Native American healers in New Mexico. Her vast knowledge and holistic approach to individualized patient care has been the cornerstone of her success as a nurse, educator, entrepreneur, and promoter of health. So, Nurse Heather, I am ecstatic to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to discuss some things with you and your listeners today.
Great. So could you describe a little bit about your business? Maybe some of us, I'm from Indiana, and marijuana is not legal for medical or recreational purposes. And so what does a cannabis nurse do, and what is your business?
Well, what cannabis nurses do is we have gathered knowledge surrounding the endocannabinoid system. And so we've now learned through science, and actually the research has been in place since the 1960s. It came out of Israel from Dr. Raphael Mechoulam. But basically what the endocannabinoid system is the 12th human body system that we know of. And it's the homeostasis or balancing system that helps to keep all of our other body systems in check and in homeostasis with one another. That's why we see that cannabis any different disease processes, the resetting system in the human body. And so cannabis nurses know about the endocannabinoid system and assist our patients with helping to balance that system for overall health and well-being.
Okay. So in your business, you're an educator, an entrepreneur, and promoter of health. So can you describe those areas?
Well, I've been a nurse for 10 years, and I've been a cannabis nurse for 10 years within the licensed, regulated system. And so I started as a medical director with a dispensary in the state of New Mexico in 2009, and have been working with patients in that area. But one of the things I noticed in New Mexico at the time was that only cannabis flower was available. And so there was a need for what I called smokeless alternatives, and was able to be the first one to start an edible, basically an extraction and an infusion facility where smokeless alternatives could be prepared for patients legally in the state of New Mexico. So that's kind of where my cannabis nursing entrepreneur piece came in. And it's just carried me along over the years. I also started the first edibles and infusion kitchens in the state of Arizona. And I'm now in California working on some very interesting projects, including over 10 years of networking with nurses that now understand the endocannabinoid system. We have what we collectively call the Cannabis Nurses Network. And we utilize our network to empower nurses through 4 areas: education, opportunity, recognition, and advocacy.
Wow. So Heather and I met through the American Holistic Nurses Association, and then she invited me to the Cannabis Nurses Network. So I just went to meet her because I didn't have time to go to the event, and it was packed. You filled up the entire Sheraton practically, and it was so interesting to just walk around there and just see the level of interest.
Well, and the levels vary. So even though the room was packed, there were people that are highly knowledgeable in this area, as well as we had nurses that were from southern states that aren't quite legal yet, that they didn't want to be on camera because they weren't even accepting the continued education units that we were offering, because they didn't want anyone to know that they knew this information, that they had attended this event. And I think that's one of the misconceptions about us coining the term of cannabis nurses, that we're focused on cannabis. But what we've learned through the science about the endocannabinoid system is that there are many ways to feed and care for this particular system with or without cannabis. And so that's part of what we discussed during the conference, are ways to support and care for the system if you are in a state like yourself where your patients don't have access to cannabis products.
And it's not like nurses are advocating recreational use at all. It's medically, right?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because we have a colleague, Nurse Marcy Cooper out of Denver, Colorado. They were the first state to legalize. And what she focuses on, for 20 some years, she's been a hospice nurse. And what she found through the passage of adult use cannabis in Colorado was that this opened up the doors for her hospice patients. Many of her hospice patients were too ill to actually go to a doctor to get a recommendation. Their normal doctors wouldn't sign. And so that was a very taxing effort for a hospice patient. But when the doors opened up for adult use, this allowed family members and caregivers to run to the store, pick up products, and bring them home for their loved ones to be able to use and try. And what she said is that cannabis use for end-of-life care allows for quality of life, precious moments where families and dying patients can, in those last moments of their life, be able to spend quality time with their family, awake and alert, rather than utilizing the comfort care kits that really just put patients to sleep and leave them, out of it in their last moments of life.
Interesting. Yeah, I had a, just be careful with your license as a nurse, because I did have a nurse who went over the border to get cannabis for somebody, and you can't do that as a nurse. You have to follow the laws in your state. And as a nurse, if your urine is positive for marijuana, it's still federally classified as a controlled substance, and you could have trouble with your license. So that's my disclaimer there. But
yes, and we always advocate nurses, if you are working directly with medicine and patients, to make sure that you have the proper cards and licensing within your state to be able to do those things. But mainly what a cannabis nurse does is they educate and support and empower patients in whatever treatments they are choosing for themselves. So it was a very great point. One more thing I'd like to bring up is the National Council State Board of Nursing and the new guidelines and recommendations that were published July of last year, 2018, that really highlights and brings it down to what nurses need to know about cannabis and how to keep themselves safe within their license, but also how to support patients with those things.
And I just love your passion to what you do. I mean, I know it just oozes out all over that you feel like you are just in your purpose of helping people.
I'm trying. It's kind of I was bit by the bug of cannabis as medicine, really from a medical perspective, when I had an MS patient, was my home care patient. And I was a psych nurse, so I got a lot of the more difficult patients. And he was a 30-year-old that had gotten MS, and it completely debilitated his life, and he was angry. And so they had asked me to go in and chat with him. And part of what I was able to do when I received his medication record was I reviewed it, and the first medicine on top was cannabis, and I was stunned, Lorie. I had never seen that before. And so it lent me to have this opportunity to be able to assess him for these things. Why do you use cannabis? How are you using it? What is it working for? And he was able to explain all these different methods of administration, from topical use on his legs at night so he could go to sleep without having the spasms in his legs, to even just inhaling cannabis throughout the day to help with his mood he found it to be helpful. And so I learned so much from that patient. And he was actually the 5th licensed patient in the state of New Mexico. And so right out the gate, I felt like I had beautiful opportunities to learn.
So how did you get the courage to leave your nursing job to go into cannabis nursing?
Great question. So I was approached by a group of people that were going for a license to be able to manufacture and cultivate and distribute cannabis in the state of New Mexico. And part of what the requirements were was that they had a medical director on board that was either a nurse or a doctor. And so they had approached me because I had this awareness that had come to me with my patients being helped. And I agreed to be their medical director, and they received the license. And that's really how I got into the industry component of it. My job mainly consisted of going to medical conferences where researchers were there talking about the research they were conducting on the subject. And I was able to learn from a very high level what was going on. And then I could bring it back and train our staff so that they could understand how to be providing the cleanest, most effective medicine for our patients. And it set us above the rest, and it really taught a lot of people. And some of those staff members, even from the early days, have now gone on to have wonderful careers in the cannabis industry. And it's those things that make me most passionate, is being able to help others gain their wings and fly.
So interesting, because most of the people we've interviewed have all been like legal nurse consultants, health coaches, seminar programs, things like that. But you're doing something very, very different and helping people in a different way as well.
Well, and a lot of nurses are curious about this now,
Yeah.
Lorie, because, all these states are coming on board. Really, there's only 2 states right now that have no access to any kind of cannabinoids, whether it's CBD only or whatever. And so we've made huge strides just in the legal component and regulatory component. But what it's also done is brought a lot more people to our medical community who are patients using this medicine, and it does not behoove them to have a judgmental, stigmatic, or non-knowledgeable healthcare professional discussing these things with them. And so we are seeing nurses and doctors that are much more interested in learning so that they can have knowledgeable and informative conversations with their patients.
Interesting. And I know as a nurse, many of us have chronic pain. We've been working the floors 12-hour shifts for years and years, and it takes a toll on our body, and we want to help our endocannabinoid system and take CBD. So just be careful and make sure that the CBD oil, if you choose to take it, contains no THC so that you don't show up positive, because the boards saying, I just took CBD, or I went to a party and had a brownie, or anything like that, the boards do not look on favorably. So just my professional service announcements.
That's why we love having the legal, voice to really keep us in line. And I will share with your viewers and listeners that I just had a nurse call me in tears last week. And she was a nurse that had moved from a southern state to the state of Arizona. She came there for a job that she was getting ready to work. And when she went for her pre-screening test, urinalysis, it came back positive for THC, and she was stunned. She couldn't believe it. She said, I've never used a drug in my entire life. She said, I've been using this CBD oil to sleep, and that is it. And so I asked her, can you please talk to me about the product that you had? And so your listeners need to understand that there's 3 components when it comes to CBD products. So there's full spectrum. And if you see a product that says full spectrum, that means it has THC in it. If it says broad spectrum means that they've removed the THC from it. Or if it's a hemp isolate product, that means there is no THC in it. So anything that's a full spectrum, and unfortunately that was the oil that this nurse had used, was a full spectrum CBD oil. She had purchased it over the internet, so she assumed it was safe. And unfortunately, she had this terrible experience. And so the legal term for hemp is that it has less than 0.3% THC in it. So even hemp products can have a small trace of THC in it legally, but that doesn't help you when you go to have a urinalysis test and it comes back positive for THC. So definitely be aware. And if you are going to even use CBD products and you're in a medical state, we would always recommend just get your card, your patient card, so that you can be protected legally, because that is an important component to cannabis nursing if you're using it for yourself.
Yeah, and I'm not so sure the card will protect you. So again, just be careful with that as well.
Maybe not for the job component, but definitely, if you're using hemp CBD products that you didn't know had THC in it, from a legal standpoint of, being caught with a product or something like that, legally you'll be fine.
Yeah. So I really wanted to, the whole purpose of this program is to talk about business, but I really want to ask you some more questions, like about the cannabinoidal system. And that is, if you could educate how, it's my understanding the hemp part is the female part of the plant, and and it doesn't contain THC, right?
So cannabis in general is a plant, and there's different strains and species in between that. So what we call hemp is actually a different type of a cultivar of cannabis that has higher levels of CBD. It has more stock product to it. So there's a lot of products, even building materials and hempcrete that are being created. It's not the sole medical part, but then there's this cannabis sativa that's more the medical components, and the flower is where all of the goodies lie. And so these are plants that produce flowers, and the flowers are the medicine. And on those flowers, there are many cannabinoids, 140 at least cannabinoids that have been identified that we know of, but also terpenes and terpenoids, which are the smelly aroma parts, that those are medicinal as well. So the plant is the plant, and there's really not a cannabis plant that doesn't have any THC at all. It just has smaller amounts or trace amounts. So always being careful on just even the plant side of what you're working with. And there's lab testing that can be done to identify what's in a specific plant material so that you know what you're consuming. And many states actually require that testing is done to make sure also there's no mold or pesticides or anything like that on the medicine. That's why the regulated market is far superior to what we call the black market or illicit market, because there are these safety regulatory places put into place. But as far as the system, so maybe I should go back a little bit, because I had spoke about Raphael Mechoulam earlier, and he was the researcher out of Israel that first identified THC as the psychoactive component in cannabis. And there was a story behind that, and it was really that he wanted to know what it was in hashish that was making people high. And by taking the hashish and identifying what it was, they found these different components in cannabinoids, CBD also, but it didn't get you high, so that wasn't what they were looking for, and it kind of got set to the side. But once they had the THC molecule kind of identified, they said, okay, now where in the human body is that working? And that's where they were able to see that it was binding to these receptors, these G-couple protein receptors that we now know as CB1 and CB2 receptors. And that was the first identification within the body of an area where cannabis was actively working. But then that led the researchers through time to say, okay, well, if we have these receptors, what is it that the human body is producing to bind to those naturally? And that's where we were able to learn about endocannabinoids. Anandamide and 2-AG are two of the larger ones that we know of that bind to these receptor sites to really help modulate all function through the nervous system, the respiratory system, and just really keeping this homeostasis, even our digestive system, to keep our systems in check and in balance. So it's interesting that this plant and our desire to know what it was that got people high has really helped from a scientific perspective to help us understand a whole new system that our bodies have that currently had not been addressed, known about, or taught to me as a nurse. I know for sure.
Yeah. Well, it's clear you're extremely knowledgeable about it. So thank you for sharing it with our viewers.
I hope I didn't lose your viewers on that. It was a lot of information in a short amount of time.
So if people are interested in becoming a cannabis nurse, where would you suggest that they go to find more information?
Well, that's part of the reason we have the network in place. So cannabisnursesnetwork.com is the website that we have where you can find a nurse, nurses that are interested in working with patients, or they've created their own businesses and they're entrepreneurs. They have public profiles that you can find a nurse on our website. We have articles that you can read to really, from our nurses. It's writings by nurses for nurses about the subject. And then always we have our annual conference, the one that you came to, and I was so happy to meet you there. We will be hosting our conference September of 2020. So next September, we'll have our 5th annual Cannabis Nurses Network Conference. We'd love for all of your viewers to come. It doesn't have anything to do with cannabis, so to speak. It's more about the science, the research, the implementation, the laws and regulations that we need to be aware of as nurses, and then just a beautiful opportunity to network with holistic nurses who are trying to expand their knowledge base to help their patients further.
Great, thank you. Wonderful resource. So what was your biggest mistake that you've made in your business?
Oh, I've made so many. I mean, I think that's
to be the theme.
That's part of it, is we learn. I've tried to say I haven't had failures. I've had really great learning experiences. And as nurses, we don't necessarily go to school to be business entrepreneurs. And so I feel like I've been on this fast track for an MBA for the last 10 years, trying to, and being in a new emerging industry has its own set of challenges. I would say I gave a lot away when I should have put a little more value on the things that I was offering. And I've learned over time that the price or the value that you set to something that you're offering really helps the person that's coming to receive that from you place value on what it is that you're offering as well. So over 10 years of giving away free advice and having my brain picked and doing all these things, I could have probably made more income and done more financially so that I could move my business further had I put more value on those things. But again, not a failure. I've made wonderful relationships. I've spread this message far and wide. People are intrigued and inspired. And my whole goal is to help your viewers and listeners go out and Google the endocannabinoid system and start looking at this research, and go to pubmed.gov and start looking up the science. You'll be fascinated at what you find.
So interesting and so true what you said. Because it comes easy to us, we think that that people shouldn't pay for it, and that's not true. We have worked years and years and years to get the knowledge that we have, and we deserve to get paid for it. Whether we get paid in the hospital setting or in our business, we deserve to get paid. I never recommend that anybody give their services away for free, because otherwise people don't have skin in the game to benefit from what you give. If you give away things for free, then you have no skin in the game. How many times have you downloaded a freebie and you didn't do anything with it because you didn't pay for it? And it's like the law of reciprocity. When you give, you get. But when somebody pays you and they receive your services, they get so much more than just getting it for free. So thank you for bringing that up.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. You know, we as nurses are caregivers, and we're compassionate, and we want to give. We're givers, but it hurts us personally, and we need to really focus on our self-care. I know that the American Holistic Nurses Association talks heavily about self-care, and the cannabis nursing space focuses heavily on that as well. So it can be difficult and hard, and we need to care for ourselves financially, spiritually, emotionally, mentally, physically, all the way down the line.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what is the best advice that you would give a nurse, maybe one of our viewers watching, who wants to take the leap and start their own business?
In the cannabis space? Or any place?
Yeah, any place.
I would say definitely do your research. Make sure that what it is that you're trying to offer actually has a need, that, you know, identify the problem that you're trying to solve, and be a solution for a problem. And then really get your plan set before you start taking too many financial risks in creating those things. Because what I've learned over time is, as you build the airplane as you fly, which we all do to some degree, you do end up putting way more into it than if you just at the beginning created your business plan appropriately, met with advisors, seek advice from nurses like yourself, Lorie, that have the legal aspects, so that you can keep your license safe, and the things that you're doing don't pose a conflict of interest in whatever areas you're working. So yeah, do your research, plan, and then implement and have fun.
Yeah. And just do it. Do it. If you dream it, you can achieve it.
Absolutely. I did not go to nursing school to ever think I'd be on this podcast with you talking about, you know, cannabis nursing, but here I am, and I couldn't be happier. So you never know where little things will lead you when you just keep taking those steps forward and follow your passion.
Yeah, I never thought I'd be interviewing 21 nurse business owners either, but when you get the message, it's to do it, to inspire other nurses, to tell them what else is available out there. You follow the call.
Definitely. And don't second guess yourself, right? I mean,
Right.
We as nurses have that nursing intuition, that personal intuition, and, you know, listen to your gut, let it lead you where you need to go. Be fearless, because anything worth doing is not that easy. So, you know, don't be afraid to grab a hold of your vision and don't let go.
So true. So true. Well, Heather, it's been amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge with our viewers. And it's been a pleasure. So thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And I hope this has been helpful to someone out there.
Well, thank you. Bye, everyone. Bye for now.
Bye. Take care.